I never thought I'd see the day when my own children would look me in the eye and tell me to handle it alone. Not after everything their mother and I had done for them. Not after all the years of sacrifice, the late nights, the missed vacations, the endless support. But life has a way of showing you truths you never wanted to see, and sometimes those truths cut deeper than any wound. It started on a gray November morning, the kind where the sky hangs low and the world feels heavy. My wife, Anna, had been feeling unwell for weeks. She brushed it off at first. Just a cough, just a little tired, just a headache that wouldn't go away. But I saw the way she winced when she thought I wasn't looking, the way she pressed her hand to her side, the way her smile faded a little more each day. I begged her to see a doctor, but Anna was stubborn. She always put everyone else first, always made sure the kids had what they needed, always made sure I had a hot meal and a warm bed, even when she was running on empty. That morning she collapsed in the kitchen. One moment she was reaching for the coffee pot, the next she was on the floor, her face pale, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I called 911, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. The paramedics arrived in minutes, but it felt like hours. They loaded her onto a stretcher, their faces grim, their voices low. I rode with her in the ambulance, clutching her hand, whispering that everything would be okay, even though I didn't believe it. At the hospital, the doctors moved quickly. Tests, scans, blood work. I sat in the waiting room, my heart pounding, my mind racing through every worst-case scenario. Our children, Ethan and Grace, were at school. I called them, my voice trembling as I explained what had happened. "Mom's in the hospital," I said. "It's serious. You need to come." They arrived an hour later, Ethan with his headphones around his neck, Grace scrolling through her phone. They looked annoyed, inconvenienced. I tried to explain, tried to make them understand the gravity of the situation, but they barely listened. When the doctor finally came out, his face was grave. "Your wife has advanced lymphoma," he said. "It's aggressive. We need to start treatment immediately." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I looked at Ethan and Grace, expecting tears, fear, something. But Ethan just shrugged. "So what do we do?" he asked, as if it were a math problem he didn't want to solve. Grace didn't even look up from her phone. "Can I go back to my friend's house now?" she asked. I tried to hold it together. I tried to explain that Anna needed us, that this was going to be a fight, that we had to pull together as a family. But they didn't want to hear it. "You deal with it, Dad," Ethan said, his voice cold. "It's your problem, not ours." Grace nodded, her eyes never leaving her screen. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake them, to make them see the woman who had given them everything, who had loved them more than life itself, was fighting for her life. But all I could do was watch as they walked out of the hospital, leaving me alone in the sterile, fluorescent-lit hallway. The days that followed were a blur of hospital visits, doctor's appointments, and sleepless nights. Anna started chemotherapy, her body growing weaker with each round. I sat by her side, holding her hand, telling her stories from our early days, trying to make her smile. She was brave, so much braver than I could ever be. She never complained, never asked why, never let me see her cry. Ethan and Grace barely visited. When they did, it was out of obligation, their eyes glued to their phones, their conversations short and distracted. I tried to talk to them, tried to make them understand how much their mother needed them, but they brushed me off every time. "We're busy, Dad," Ethan would say. "We have our own lives." Grace would roll her eyes, sigh, and leave as soon as she could. I started to feel invisible, like a ghost haunting the edges of their lives. I wondered where I had gone wrong, what I could have done differently to raise children who cared so little. Anna noticed, of course. She always did. One night, as I sat by her bed, she reached for my hand. "Don't be too hard on them," she whispered. "They're young. They don't understand." But I couldn't let it go. I couldn't forgive their indifference, their selfishness. I watched as Anna grew weaker, her hair falling out in clumps, her skin growing pale and thin. I watched as she smiled through the pain, always trying to protect me, always trying to protect them. I watched as our family, once so close, fractured under the weight of illness and apathy. The bills started piling up. Insurance only covered so much. and the treatments were expensive. I sold my car, cashed out my retirement fund, took out loans. I begged Ethan and Grace for help, but they refused. "We can't afford it, Dad," Ethan said, even though I knew he had money saved from his job. Grace just shrugged, said she needed her savings for college, for clothes, for things that seemed so trivial compared to what Anna was facing. I started to feel something shift inside me, a coldness, a resolve. If they wouldn't help, if they wouldn't stand by their mother in her darkest hour, then they would have to live with the consequences. I didn't know what I would do yet, but I knew I couldn't let this go. Not after everything Anna had given them. Not after everything I had sacrificed. The hospital became my second home. I learned the rhythms of the place, the way the nurses changed shifts, the sound of the cleaning carts rolling down the hall, the soft beeping of monitors in the night. I brought Anna her favorite blanket, the one with the faded sunflowers, and tried to make her room feel less like a place where people came to die. I read to her from her favorite books, played her the songs we used to dance to in the kitchen, and told her stories about the kids when they were little, back when their laughter filled the house and their love was simple and pure. But every day, the distance between us and our children grew wider. Ethan stopped answering my calls. Grace sent the occasional text, "How's Mom?" but never came to visit. I tried to keep Anna's spirits up, but I could see the pain in her eyes, the way she longed for her children, the way she tried to hide her disappointment. She never complained, never blamed them, but I could see it was breaking her heart. One afternoon, as Anna slept, I sat in the hospital cafeteria, staring into a cup of cold coffee. I watched other families come and go. Husbands, wives, children, all gathered around their loved ones, holding hands, sharing tears, offering comfort. I envied them. I wondered what it would feel like to have that kind of support, to know that your family would stand by you no matter what. I thought about calling Ethan and Grace again, but I knew it would be pointless. They had made their choice. They had decided that Anna's fight was not their fight, that her pain was not their pain. I felt a bitterness growing inside me, a resentment that threatened to swallow me whole. The doctors told me Anna's cancer was not responding to treatment. They wanted to try a new drug, something experimental, but it was expensive and not covered by insurance. I sat in the doctor's office staring at the estimate, my hands shaking. I didn't have the money. I had already sold everything I could, already borrowed from everyone I knew. I thought about asking Ethan and Grace one more time, but the memory of their indifference stopped me. I couldn't bear to hear them say no again. That night, I sat by Anna's bed, holding her hand as she slept. I watched the rise and fall of her chest, the way her fingers curled around mine even in her dreams. I thought about all the years we had spent together, all the memories we had made, all the sacrifices we had endured. I thought about the children we had raised, the love we had poured into them, the dreams we had for their futures. I wondered where it had all gone wrong. When Anna woke, she smiled at me, her eyes bright despite the pain. "You look tired," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "You need to take care of yourself." I tried to smile back, but the words caught in my throat. "I'm fine," I lied. "I just wish the kids would come." She squeezed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "They'll come around," she said. "They're just scared. It's hard for them to see me like this." I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't. I had seen the look in their eyes, heard the coldness in their voices. They weren't scared. They were indifferent. They had already moved on, already decided that Anna's illness was an inconvenience, a burden they didn't want to carry. The next morning, I called the hospital's financial counselor. I explained our situation, begged for help, asked if there was anything they could do. She was kind, but there was nothing she could offer. The drug was too new, too expensive, too risky. I hung up the phone, feeling more alone than ever. I spent the next few days in a fog, moving through the motions of caring for Anna, barely able to think. I watched as she grew weaker, as the light in her eyes faded, as her laughter became less frequent. I tried to stay strong for her, but inside, I was falling apart. One evening, as I sat by her bed, Anna reached for my hand. "Promise me something," she said, her voice trembling. "Promise me you'll take care of the kids, no matter what happens." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "I promise," I whispered, even though I wasn't sure I could keep that promise, even though I wasn't sure I wanted to. A week later, Anna slipped into a coma. The doctors told me it was only a matter of time. I called Ethan and Grace, told them to come, told them their mother was dying. Ethan said he was busy with work. Grace said she had an exam. Neither of them came. I sat by Anna's side, holding her hand, whispering words of love and comfort, telling her it was okay to let go. I watched as her breathing slowed, as her heart struggled to keep beating, as her body finally gave in. When she died, I felt something inside me break, a pain so deep, so raw, I thought I might never recover. The funeral was small, a few friends, some distant relatives, and me. Ethan and Grace didn't come. They didn't call. They didn't send flowers. I stood by Anna's grave, the wind cold against my face, and made a silent vow. They would regret this. They would regret every moment of indifference, every word of dismissal, every time they turned their backs on the woman who had given them everything. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to hurt them. But I couldn't let them walk away from this without understanding the pain they had caused. I couldn't let them forget what they had done. After the funeral, I went home to an empty house. Anna's things were everywhere. Her books on the nightstand, her sweater draped over the back of a chair, her favorite mug in the sink. I sat in the living room, surrounded by memories, and let the grief wash over me. I cried for hours, for Anna, for myself, for the family we had lost. When the tears finally stopped, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I knew what I had to do. I would honor Anna's memory, not by forgiving our children, but by making sure they understood the consequences of their actions. I would show them what it meant to lose someone you loved, to be left alone in the world, to carry the weight of regret. I started by gathering every receipt, every bill, every record of the money we had spent on Ethan and Grace over the years. College tuition, car payments, medical bills, birthday parties, vacations, every dollar, every sacrifice. I made copies, organized them into neat folders, and wrote a letter to each of them. In the letter, I told them the truth. I told them how much their mother had loved them, how much she had given up for them, how much she had suffered in her final days. I told them how their absence had broken her heart, how their indifference had been the final blow. I mailed the letters, along with the folders of receipts, and waited. I didn't expect a response. I didn't expect them to apologize. But I wanted them to know. I wanted them to feel the weight of what they had done. The days after sending those letters were strangely quiet. I went through the motions of daily life, but everything felt hollow. The house was too big, too silent, every room echoing with memories of Anna's laughter, her gentle voice, the way she'd hum while making breakfast. I found myself talking to her sometimes, whispering into the empty air, asking her what I should do next. There was no answer, only the soft creak of the floorboards and the ticking of the old clock she loved. I checked the mailbox every day, half expecting a letter from Ethan or Grace, some sign that my words had reached them. But nothing came. No calls, no texts, no apology. I wondered if they'd even open the envelopes, or if they'd toss them aside like another bill they didn't want to pay. The anger simmered inside me, but beneath it was a deeper ache, a longing for the family we once were, for the children who used to run into my arms, for the wife who had been my anchor. One evening, as I was sorting through Anna's things, I found an old photo album tucked away in the back of the closet. The cover was worn, the pages yellowed with age. I sat on the bed and flipped through it, page by page, watching our lives unfold in snapshots. There was Ethan, grinning with a missing front tooth, holding up a trophy from his first soccer game. Grace, in her favorite pink dress, blowing out the candles on her birthday cake. Anna and I, young and in love, standing on the beach at sunset, her hair blowing in the wind. I traced my finger over the images, remembering the way Anna would laugh when the kids did something silly, the way she'd pull us all into a group hug, her arms strong and warm. I wondered how it was possible for so much love to disappear, for a family to fall apart so completely. I closed the album and set it aside, feeling the weight of the past pressing down on me. A week passed before I heard from Ethan. He called late one night, his voice tight and defensive. "Dad, what's with all this paperwork? Are you trying to guilt us or something?" I could hear the irritation in his tone, the same impatience he'd shown at the hospital. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my own anger in check. "I just wanted you to understand," I said quietly. "Your mother gave everything for you. She deserved better." There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing, could almost picture him pacing his apartment, running a hand through his hair the way he did when he was frustrated. "Look, I'm sorry things turned out the way they did, but I have my own life, Dad. I can't just drop everything." I felt a coldness settle in my chest. "Your mother was dying, Ethan. She needed you. I needed you." He didn't respond. After a moment, he muttered something about being busy and hung up. I stared at the phone, the silence in the room suddenly deafening. Grace's response came a few days later, in the form of a text message. "I got your letter. I don't know what you want from me. I'm sorry Mom got sick, but it's not fair to blame us. We're just trying to live our lives." I read the message over and over, trying to make sense of it. Was I being unfair? Was I asking too much? I thought about Anna, about the way she'd always put the kids first, about the way she'd never asked for anything in return. I thought about the nights I'd spent by her side, the way she'd squeezed my hand and whispered, "Promise me you'll take care of them." I wondered if this was what she'd meant, if this was what she'd wanted. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had to change. I couldn't let Ethan and Grace walk away from this without understanding the consequences of their choices. I couldn't let them forget the woman who had loved them more than life itself. I started to make plans. I met with a lawyer, a friend of mine from college, and explained the situation. He listened patiently, nodding as I told him about Anna's illness, the kids, absence, the financial strain. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied me for a long moment. "You want to sue your own children?" he asked, his tone neutral. I shook my head. "It's not about the money. It's about making them see what they've done. It's about accountability." He nodded slowly. "There are ways to do that. You could demand repayment for the money you spent on them. College, cars, all of it. It would make a statement." I hesitated. The idea felt harsh, almost cruel. But then I remembered Anna's last days, the way she'd waited for her children to come, the way her eyes had searched the doorway every time someone entered the room. I remembered the way she'd smiled through the pain, always hoping, always believing they would show up. "Do it," I said finally. "File the paperwork." The process was slow. There were forms to fill out, documents to gather, meetings with the lawyer. I kept everything organized, every receipt, every bill, every record of the sacrifices we'd made for Ethan and Grace. I felt a strange sense of purpose, a clarity I hadn't felt in months. This was for Anna. This was for the family we'd lost. When the lawsuit was finally filed, I sent copies to Ethan and Grace. I expected anger, outrage, maybe even a visit. But there was only silence. Days passed, then weeks. I went about my life, tending to the house, visiting Anna's grave, talking to her as if she could hear me. I told her about the lawsuit, about the silence from the kids, about the emptiness that filled the house. One afternoon, as I was watering the garden, Ethan showed up at the door. He looked tired, older than I remembered, his eyes shadowed with something I couldn't quite name. He stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, staring at the ground. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. I nodded and led him inside. We sat in the living room, the silence between us heavy and awkward. He glanced around, his eyes lingering on Anna's things, the photo album on the coffee table, the blanket draped over the armchair. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said finally. "I should have been there. I didn't know how to handle it." I looked at him, searching his face for the boy I used to know. "Your mother needed you, Ethan." "I needed you." He nodded, his eyes filling with tears. "I know. I messed up. I didn't want to see her like that. I didn't want to remember her that way." I felt my anger soften, replaced by a deep, aching sadness. We don't always get to choose how we remember the people we love. Sometimes we have to be there, even when it's hard. He wiped his eyes, his shoulders shaking. "What do you want me to do?" I thought about Anna, about the promise I'd made to her. "I want you to remember her. I want you to honor her. And I want you to understand what it means to be part of a family." He nodded, his face crumpling. "I'll try, Dad." "I promise." After Ethan left that evening, the house felt a little less empty. I sat in the living room long after he was gone, the echoes of our conversation lingering in the air. I thought about what he'd said, about not wanting to remember Anna that way, about not knowing how to handle it. I tried to put myself in his shoes, to remember what it was like to be young and scared and overwhelmed by things you couldn't control. But the pain of Anna's absence and the memory of those lonely nights in the hospital still weighed heavily on me. The next morning, I woke to a message from Grace. It was longer than her usual texts, and I could tell she'd struggled to find the right words. "Dad, I'm sorry. I know I should have been there for Mom. I didn't know what to say. I felt helpless. I thought if I stayed away, it wouldn't hurt as much. But it hurts anyway. I miss her. I miss you. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "Of course, Grace. I miss you too. Come home when you're ready." She arrived that afternoon, her eyes red and swollen, her hands trembling as she hugged me. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Anna used to serve us pancakes on Sunday mornings, and talked for hours. Grace told me about the guilt she'd been carrying, about the nightmares that kept her awake at night, about the way she'd tried to bury her grief under schoolwork and parties and endless scrolling on her phone. "I thought if I just kept moving, kept busy, I wouldn't have to feel it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it's always there. I keep seeing her face, the way she looked the last time I saw her. I wish I could go back. I wish I could tell her I love her." I reached across the table and took her hand. "She knew, Grace. She always knew. She loved you more than anything." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of our shared loss settling between us. I thought about Anna, about the way she'd always been the glue that held our family together, about the way she'd never let us go to bed angry, about the way she'd always found a way to forgive. I wondered if I could do the same. Grace stayed for dinner that night. We cooked together, fumbling through Anna's old recipes, laughing when we burned the garlic bread, crying when we found her handwritten notes in the margins of the cookbook. It felt good to remember her, to talk about her, to let the grief out instead of holding it in. After dinner, we sat in the living room and looked through the photo album together. Grace pointed out her favorite pictures, told stories I'd forgotten, asked questions about Anna's childhood. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. But the lawsuit still hung over us, a shadow I couldn't ignore. Ethan called the next day, asking if we could meet. We sat in a quiet corner of a coffee shop, the noise of the city muffled by the thick glass windows. He looked tired, older, his face drawn with worry. "Dad, I've been thinking about what you said," he began, his voice hesitant. "About Mom, about the family. I know I let you down. I know I let her down. I want to make it right, but I don't know how." I sipped my coffee, searching for the right words. "It's not about the money, Ethan. It never was. It's about understanding what you lost. What we all lost. It's about honoring your mother's memory, about being there for each other." He nodded, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I want to try. I want to be better." We talked for a long time, about Anna, about the past, about the future. I told him about Grace's visit, about the way we'd cooked dinner together, about the hope I felt for the first time in a long while. He smiled, a real smile, the kind I hadn't seen since he was a boy. When I got home, I found Grace in the garden, tending to Anna's roses. She looked up as I approached, her face streaked with dirt and tears. "I want to keep them alive," she said. "For Mom." I knelt beside her, helping her pull weeds, trim branches, water the thirsty soil. We worked in silence, the sun setting behind us, the air filled with the scent of blooming flowers. I thought about Anna, about the way she'd always found beauty in the smallest things, about the way she'd taught us to care for each other, even when it was hard. That night, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter to Ethan and Grace. I told them about Anna's last days, about the promise I'd made to her, about the pain of losing her. I told them I forgave them, that I understood how hard it was to face death, to face grief, to face the reality of losing someone you love. I told them I wanted to move forward, to rebuild our family, to honor Anna's memory by loving each other the way she loved us. I left the letter on the kitchen table, knowing they would find it in the morning. I went to bed that night feeling lighter, the burden of anger and resentment finally beginning to lift. In the days that followed, Ethan and Grace came home more often. We cooked together, laughed together, cried together. We visited Anna's grave, brought her fresh flowers, told her stories about our days. We started to heal, slowly, painfully, but together. The lawsuit was still there, a reminder of the pain we'd all endured, but it no longer felt like a weapon. It felt like a lesson, a turning point, a way to force us to confront the truth we'd been avoiding. We talked about dropping it, about moving on, about finding a new way to honor Anna's memory. One evening, as we sat in the garden, Ethan turned to me. "Dad, I know we can't change the past, but I want to be here now. I want to be part of this family again." Grace nodded, her eyes shining. "Me too." I smiled, feeling Anna's presence in the warm evening air, in the scent of roses, in the laughter of our children. I knew we still had a long way to go, but for the first time since Anna's death, I believed we could make it. The weeks that followed were a slow, careful dance of forgiveness and rediscovery. Ethan and Grace began to visit more regularly, sometimes together, sometimes alone. The house, once so silent and heavy, started to fill with the sounds of life again. Footsteps on the stairs, laughter drifting from the kitchen, the clatter of dishes as we cooked meals side by side. It wasn't the same as before, but it was something new, something fragile and precious. We talked a lot, sometimes late into the night, about Anna, about the choices we'd made, about the pain we'd all carried in our own ways. Grace confessed that she'd spent months feeling numb, unable to process the loss, afraid that if she let herself feel it, she'd never stop crying. Ethan admitted that he'd thrown himself into work, using the long hours and endless projects as a shield against the guilt that gnawed at him every time he thought of his mother's last days. I listened, sometimes offering comfort, sometimes just letting the silence stretch between us. I realized that I wasn't the only one who had felt abandoned. We had all been lost, each of us trapped in our own grief, unable to reach out to the others. Anna had always been the bridge, the one who brought us together, and without her, we drifted apart, each of us trying to find our way back in the dark. One afternoon, as we sat in the living room sorting through boxes of Anna's things, Grace found a stack of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. They were love letters, written by Anna to me during our first years together. We took turns reading them aloud, laughing at her jokes, marveling at her wisdom, feeling her presence in every word. It was as if she were there with us, guiding us back to each other, reminding us of the love that had built our family. The lawsuit, once a looming threat, became a topic of honest conversation. Ethan and Grace asked me why I'd done it, why I'd chosen such a drastic step. I told them the truth, that I'd been desperate, that I'd wanted them to understand the depth of my pain, that I'd needed them to see what their absence had cost. I told them I didn't want their money, that I only wanted their presence, their love, their willingness to face the hard things with me. They listened, really listened, and for the first time, I felt heard. We agreed to drop the lawsuit, to let go of the anger and resentment that had poisoned our family. We promised to be there for each other, to talk openly about our feelings, to honor Anna's memory by living the way she had taught us, bravely, honestly, with love at the center of everything. We started new traditions. Every Sunday, we gathered for dinner, cooking Anna's favorite recipes, sharing stories from our week, laughing and sometimes crying together. We planted a rose bush in the garden in her honor, tending it carefully, watching it bloom as the seasons changed. We visited her grave often, bringing fresh flowers, telling her about our lives, asking for her guidance. Slowly the wounds began to heal. There were still hard days, days when the grief felt overwhelming, when the house felt too quiet, when I missed Anna so much it hurt to breathe. But there were also good days, days filled with laughter and hope, days when I could feel her presence in the warmth of the sun, in the scent of blooming roses, in the love that had begun to grow between us again. One evening, as we sat in the garden watching the sunset, Ethan turned to me. "Dad, do you think Mom would be proud of us?" I looked at him, at Grace, at the family we were slowly becoming again. "I think she'd be proud that we found our way back to each other. I think she'd be proud that we're trying." Grace smiled, wiping away a tear. "I wish she could see us now." I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "She does, Grace. She always will." As the sky faded from gold to deep blue, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. We had been through so much, had lost so much, but we were still here, still fighting, still loving. Anna's absence would always be a part of us, but so would her love, her strength, her unwavering belief in the power of family. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the journey we'd taken, the pain, the anger, the regret, but also the forgiveness, the healing, the hope. I knew there would be more hard days ahead, more challenges to face, more lessons to learn. But I also knew that we would face them together, as a family, just as Anna would have wanted. The summer after Anna's passing was the first time in years that the three of us spent real time together, not out of obligation, but out of a genuine desire to reconnect. The house, once a museum of grief, began to feel like a home again. Grace moved back in for a while, taking a break from her studies to help me with the garden and the endless little repairs Anna used to handle with a quiet competence. Ethan visited every weekend, sometimes bringing groceries, sometimes just himself, and a willingness to sit in the backyard and talk. We found comfort in routine. Mornings started with coffee on the porch, the three of us wrapped in old sweaters, watching the sun rise over Anna's roses. Grace would read aloud from Anna's favorite novels, her voice soft and steady, while Ethan and I listened, sometimes lost in thought, sometimes sharing a smile at a familiar passage. The pain of Anna's absence was still there, but it was no longer sharp and raw. It had softened, become a part of the fabric of our days, a quiet ache that reminded us of how much we had loved and been loved. One Saturday, we decided to clean out the attic. It was a daunting task. Boxes stacked to the ceiling, old furniture covered in dust, forgotten treasures and memories waiting to be rediscovered. We worked together, sorting through Anna's childhood keepsakes, Ethan's old science fair trophies, Grace's collection of stuffed animals. Each item told a story, sparked a memory, brought laughter and sometimes tears. At the bottom of one box, we found a stack of Anna's journals. Grace opened one and began to read, her voice trembling at first, then growing stronger as she shared Anna's thoughts, her hopes, her fears, her dreams for our family. We listened in silence, each of us hearing Anna's voice and the words she had left behind. It was a gift, a way to know her more deeply, to understand the love and strength that had shaped our lives. That evening, we sat around the kitchen table, the journal spread out before us, and talked about the future. Grace confessed that she was afraid to go back to school, afraid that she would lose the connection we had rebuilt. Ethan admitted that he was struggling at work, that the pressure to succeed felt meaningless without Anna's encouragement. I told them that I was lonely, that I missed their mother every day, but that I was grateful for the time we were spending together. We made a pact that night to support each other, to stay connected, to honor Anna's memory by living fully and loving deeply. We promised to keep her traditions alive, to celebrate her birthday with her favorite chocolate cake, to volunteer at the local shelter the way she used to write letters to each other when words were too hard to say out loud. As the weeks passed, we began to see the changes in ourselves and in each other. Grace grew more confident, her laughter returning, her eyes brighter. She started painting again, filling the house with color and light. Ethan found a new job, one that allowed him more time with family, and he started coaching a youth soccer team, passing on the lessons Anna had taught him about kindness and perseverance. I found solace in the garden, tending to Anna's roses, watching them bloom and fade with the seasons. I started writing again, filling notebooks with memories, stories, and letters to Anna. It was a way to keep her close, to process the grief that still lingered, to remind myself of the love that had shaped my life. One afternoon, as I was pruning the roses, Grace joined me in the garden. She knelt beside me, her hands gentle as she worked the soil. "Do you think Mom would be happy with us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked at her, at the woman she was becoming, at the strength and kindness in her eyes. "I think she'd be proud, Grace. I think she'd be grateful that we found our way back to each other." Grace smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I miss her every day." "So do I said, pulling her into a hug. "But I see her in you, in Ethan, in the life we're building together. She's still with us, in every moment, in every memory, in every act of love." That night, as we sat on the porch watching the stars, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in a long time. The pain of loss was still there, but it was no longer the only thing I felt. There was hope and love and the promise of new beginnings. Autumn arrived quietly, painting the trees in shades of gold and crimson. The air grew crisp, and the days shortened, but inside our home, warmth returned. Grace decided to enroll in a local art class, her canvases soon filling the living room with vibrant colors and bold strokes. Ethan, more relaxed than I'd seen him in years, started coming by after soccer practice, sometimes with a few of his players in tow, their laughter echoing through the halls. The house, once a place of sorrow, was alive again. We began to talk more openly about Anna, not just about her illness or her final days, but about the life she lived, the way she'd dance in the kitchen when her favorite song came on, the way she'd sneak chocolate chips into the pancake batter, the way she'd listen, really listen, when any of us needed to talk. We shared stories, some funny, some bittersweet, and in doing so we kept her memory alive, not as a source of pain, but as a wellspring of love. One evening, as the three of us sat around the fire pit in the backyard, Ethan turned to me. "Dad, do you remember that camping trip Mom planned when we were kids? The one where it rained the whole weekend and we ended up sleeping in the car?" I laughed, the memory vivid. She tried so hard to make it special. She even roasted marshmallows over a candle in the back seat. Grace grinned. "I remember her singing us to sleep, even though the thunder was so loud. I never felt safer." We sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling, the stars bright above us. I realized then that Anna's greatest gift had been her ability to make us feel safe, loved, and seen, no matter the circumstances. It was a gift we could still give each other. As the holidays approached, we faced them with a mix of anticipation and dread. It would be our first Thanksgiving and Christmas without Anna, and the thought of her empty chair at the table was almost too much to bear. But we decided, together, to honor her by celebrating the way she would have wanted, surrounded by family, with good food, laughter, and gratitude. Grace took charge of the decorations, stringing lights around the windows and filling the house with the scent of cinnamon and pine. Ethan volunteered to cook the turkey, enlisting my help in turning the kitchen into a whirlwind of activity. We invited friends and neighbors, people who had supported us through the hardest times, and the house was filled with warmth and joy. During dinner, we each shared a memory of Anna, raising our glasses in her honor. There were tears, of course, but there was also laughter, and for the first time, the grief felt lighter, tempered by the love that remained. After everyone had gone home, the three of us sat together in the quiet, the glow of the fireplace casting soft shadows on the walls. Grace leaned her head on my shoulder. "I was so afraid we'd never feel like a family again," she whispered. Ethan nodded, his eyes shining. "Me too. But I think Mom would be happy. I think she'd want us to keep going, to keep loving each other." I wrapped my arms around them, holding them close. She would. And we will. As winter settled in, we found new ways to support each other. Grace's art flourished, her paintings growing more expressive and bold. Ethan's soccer team made it to the finals, and he invited us to every game, proud to share his passion with us. I started volunteering at the local library, reading to children, finding joy in their laughter and curiosity. We still missed Anna every day, but her absence no longer defined us. Instead, her love became the foundation on which we rebuilt our lives. We learned to forgive, not just each other, but ourselves, for the mistakes we'd made, the words left unsaid, the moments lost to fear and pride. One snowy evening, as we decorated the Christmas tree, Grace found an old ornament Anna had made, a tiny house, painted with the words, "Home is where the heart is." She hung it on the highest branch, her eyes bright with tears and hope. "Home is where the heart is," she repeated softly. "And our hearts are still here." I smiled, feeling Anna's presence in the warmth of the fire, the laughter of my children, the love that filled our home. We had come through the storm, battered but unbroken, and together we had found our way back to each other. The new year dawned with a quiet sense of hope. Snow blanketed the yard, muffling the world outside, and for the first time in a long while, I woke with something like anticipation. Grace had decided to stay home for another semester, taking online classes so she could be close to family. Ethan, energized by his team's success, started organizing community events, charity matches, food drives, things Anna would have loved. We fell into a rhythm that felt both new and familiar. Mornings were spent together over breakfast, sharing plans for the day, sometimes arguing over who would get the last slice of Anna's banana bread, which Grace had finally mastered. The kitchen, once a place of silent grief, was now the heart of our home again, filled with the smells of coffee and cinnamon, the sound of laughter and conversation. One afternoon, as I was sorting through a box of Anna's old recipes, I found a letter addressed to me in her handwriting. My heart skipped as I unfolded the paper, her words flowing across the page in the looping script I knew so well. "My love," it began, "if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I hope you're not alone. I hope you've let the kids back into your heart, even if they made mistakes. I hope you remember that love is always worth the risk, even when it hurts. Take care of them and let them take care of you. Don't let grief close the door on joy. I'll always be with you in every sunrise, every laugh, every act of kindness. Yours, Anna." I sat at the kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hands, tears streaming down my face. Grace found me there, and without a word, she wrapped her arms around me. Ethan joined us, and together we sat in silence, letting Anna's words wash over us, a balm for wounds that still ached. That evening we read the letter aloud, sharing our thoughts and memories, letting Anna's wisdom guide us. It became a touchstone, something we returned to whenever the pain threatened to overwhelm us, a reminder that love endures, even in the face of loss. As winter melted into spring, we began to look outward again. Grace started volunteering at the community center, teaching art classes to children. Ethan organized a fundraiser for cancer research, dedicating it to Anna's memory. I joined a support group for widowers, finding comfort in the stories of others who had walked a similar path. We made new friends, opened our home to neighbors and old acquaintances, and slowly, the circle of our lives widened. The house was often filled with guests, Grace's classmates, Ethan's teammates, families from the community. There was music and food, and the kind of easy conversation that comes from shared experience. One Saturday, we hosted a garden party in Anna's honor. The roses were in full bloom, their scent filling the air, and the yard was alive with laughter and music. We shared stories about Anna, invited others to do the same, and by the end of the evening, it felt as if she were there with us, her spirit woven into every smile, every hug, every word of kindness. After the guests had gone, the three of us sat in the garden, watching the stars appear one by one. Grace leaned against my shoulder, her voice soft. "I used to think we'd never be happy again, but I think Mom was right. Love is always worth the risk." Ethan nodded, his gaze fixed on the sky. I wish I could tell her how much I've changed, how much I miss her. I squeezed their hands, feeling Anna's presence in the cool night air. She knows. She always knew. As the night deepened, I realized that we had come full circle. We had faced the worst together, had been broken and remade by grief, and had found our way back to love. Anna's absence would always be a part of us, but so would her strength, her kindness, her unwavering belief in the power of family. We sat in the garden until the candles burned low, talking quietly, sharing dreams for the future. There was still pain, still moments of sadness, but there was also hope and laughter and the promise of new beginnings. Spring brought with it a sense of renewal, not just in the garden but in our hearts. The days grew longer, the air warmer, and the world seemed to invite us to step outside, to live again. Grace's art classes at the community center became a highlight of her week. She'd come home with paint on her hands and stories about the children she taught, how one little boy painted only in blue, how a shy girl found her voice through drawing. I saw in Grace the same nurturing spirit Anna had, the same gentle encouragement that could coax beauty from even the most uncertain soul. Ethan's fundraiser for cancer research was a resounding success. The whole community turned out, neighbors, friends, even some of Anna's old colleagues. There were speeches and music, a silent auction, and a slideshow of photos from Anna's life. I watched as Ethan stood before the crowd, his voice steady as he spoke about his mother, about the lessons she'd taught him, about the importance of compassion and resilience. I was proud of him, not just for what he'd accomplished, but for the man he was becoming. At home, I found myself drawn more and more to the garden. Anna's roses flourished, their blooms a riot of color and fragrance. I spent hours tending to them, finding peace in the simple, repetitive tasks: pruning, watering, weeding. It was a kind of meditation, a way to stay connected to Anna, to honor her memory with every blossom. One afternoon, as I was working in the garden, Grace joined me, her sketchbook in hand. She sat on the old wooden bench, drawing the roses, her brow furrowed in concentration. After a while, she looked up, her eyes bright. "Dad, do you ever think about what life would be like if Mom were still here?" I set down my trowel, wiping my hands on my jeans. All the time. I think about the things I'd say to her, the things I wish I'd done differently, but I also think about how proud she'd be of you and Ethan, of how far we've come. Grace smiled, closing her sketchbook. "I think she'd be happy we're together. I think she'd want us to keep living, to keep loving." We sat in companionable silence, the sun warm on our faces, the scent of roses thick in the air. I realized then that grief had changed us, but it hadn't destroyed us. We had learned to carry it, to let it shape us without letting it define us. Ethan arrived later that evening, his arms full of groceries. He and Grace cooked dinner together, filling the kitchen with laughter and the smell of roasting vegetables. After dinner, we played cards. The three of us crowded around the table, arguing good-naturedly over the rules, teasing each other the way we used to when Anna was alive. As the night wore on, we found ourselves talking about the future. Grace was considering applying to art school, maybe even moving to a new city. Ethan was thinking about starting his own business, something that would allow him to give back to the community. I encouraged them, proud of their ambition, their willingness to dream again. But I also reminded them that it was okay to be afraid, that it was okay to miss Anna, that it was okay to lean on each other when the world felt overwhelming. We talked about the importance of family, of staying connected, of honoring the past while embracing the future. Before bed, I sat alone in the living room, Anna's letter in my hands. I read it again, letting her words settle in my heart. "Don't let grief close the door on joy." I realized that I hadn't, not completely. There was still sadness, still moments when the loss felt fresh and raw, but there was also joy and hope and the promise of new beginnings. As I turned out the lights and climbed the stairs to bed, I felt a sense of gratitude for Anna, for my children, for the life we had shared, and for the life that still stretched out before us, full of possibility. Summer arrived in a rush of green and gold, the garden bursting with life. Anna's roses climbed higher than ever, their blooms spilling over the fence, drawing neighbors and passers-by to stop and admire. The house, once a place of sorrow, now felt like a sanctuary, a place where laughter and love had returned, where memories of Anna were honored not with silence, but with stories, with music, with the simple act of living well. Grace's art blossomed alongside the garden. She was accepted into a prestigious art program in the city, her portfolio filled with paintings inspired by the home she'd grown up in, by the garden her mother had loved, by the family that had weathered so much together. The day her acceptance letter arrived, we celebrated with a picnic in the backyard, toasting Anna with lemonade and slices of her favorite chocolate cake. Grace hugged me tightly, her eyes shining with excitement and a little fear. "I wish Mom could see this," she whispered. I squeezed her hand, feeling Anna's presence in the warm summer air. "She does, Grace. She always will." Ethan's business idea took shape, rooted in the values Anna had instilled in him: kindness, service, and community. He started a small company that organized youth sports leagues and community events, focusing on bringing people together, building confidence, and teaching kids the importance of teamwork. He asked me to help with the first big event, a summer soccer tournament that drew families from all over town. As I watched Ethan coach the kids, his encouragement echoing across the field, I saw Anna in him, the patience, the warmth, the way he made everyone feel seen. We kept our Sunday dinners, even as life grew busier. Sometimes it was just the three of us, sometimes friends or neighbors joined, but always there was a sense of belonging, of continuity, of love. We shared stories about Anna, about our week, about our hopes for the future. The pain of her absence was still there, but it had become a gentle ache, a reminder of how deeply we had loved and been loved. One evening after dinner, we sat on the porch, watching fireflies dance in the twilight. Grace showed us her latest sketches, Ethan talked about his plans for the next tournament, and I found myself thinking about how far we had come. There had been a time when I thought our family was broken beyond repair, when grief and anger had threatened to tear us apart. But we had found our way back to each other, step by step, day by day, guided by Anna's memory and the love she had given us. As the stars came out, Grace leaned her head on my shoulder. "Do you think it's possible to be happy and sad at the same time?" she asked. I smiled, wrapping my arm around her. "I think that's what it means to be human, to carry both joy and sorrow, to let them shape us, to find meaning in the space between." Ethan nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "I used to think I had to choose, either move on or stay stuck in the past. But I think Mom would want us to do both. To remember her, but also to live." We sat in silence, the night air filled with the scent of roses, the sound of crickets, the gentle hum of life moving forward. I thought about Anna, about the promise I had made to her, about the journey we had taken as a family. There had been pain and loss and regret, but there had also been forgiveness, healing, and hope. As I looked at my children, grown and growing still, I felt a deep sense of peace. We had honored Anna's memory not by clinging to the past, but by building a future she would be proud of. We had learned to forgive, to love, to live again. That night, as I lay in bed, I whispered a quiet thank you to Anna, for her love, her strength, her unwavering belief in us. I knew there would be more hard days ahead, more challenges to face, but I also knew that we would face them together, as a family, just as she would have wanted. The last days of summer slipped by in a golden haze, each one a gentle reminder of how far we'd come. Grace prepared for her move to the city, packing her canvases and brushes, her laughter echoing through the halls as she and Ethan teased each other about who would visit whom more often. The house was filled with boxes and the scent of Anna's roses, their blooms at their fullest, as if they too were celebrating this new chapter. On Grace's last night at home, we gathered in the backyard for one final dinner under the stars. Ethan grilled vegetables and chicken, Grace set the table with mismatched plates and wild flowers from the garden, and I made Anna's favorite potato salad, following her recipe to the letter. We ate slowly, savoring every bite, every story, every shared memory. The air was warm, the sky streaked with pink and gold, and for a moment it felt as if Anna was there with us, her laughter mingling with ours. After dinner we sat in a circle, each of us sharing something we'd learned in the past year. Grace spoke first, her voice steady but soft. "I learned that it's okay to ask for help, that family isn't just about being together when things are easy, but about holding on to each other when everything falls apart. I wish I'd understood that sooner, but I'm grateful I know it now." Ethan nodded, his eyes shining in the candlelight. "I learned that forgiveness isn't just something you give to others. It's something you have to give yourself. I spent a long time feeling guilty for not being there for Mom, for you, Dad, for Grace, but I know now that Mom wouldn't want us to live in regret. She'd want us to move forward, to make something good out of the pain." I looked at my children, so grown, so changed, and felt a swell of pride. I learned that love doesn't end. It changes, it grows, it finds new ways to show itself. I thought I'd lost everything when Anna died, but I see now that she left us with more than memories. She left us with each other, with the strength to keep going, with the courage to open our hearts again. We sat in silence for a while, the night alive with the sound of crickets and the distant hum of the city. Grace reached for my hand, Ethan squeezed my shoulder, and I felt Anna's presence in the warmth of their touch, in the peace that settled over us. The next morning we loaded Grace's things into Ethan's car. There were hugs and promises to call, to visit, to stay close, no matter how far apart we were. As the car pulled away, I stood in the driveway, waving until they disappeared around the corner, my heart full of hope and a bittersweet ache. The house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was the quiet of a story well told, of a chapter ending and another beginning. I walked through the rooms, touching the things Anna had loved, the books on the shelf, the photos on the wall, the roses blooming outside the window. I felt her everywhere, not as a shadow, but as a light guiding me forward. In the weeks that followed, I found new routines. I volunteered more at the library, joined a gardening club, started writing letters to Grace and Ethan every Sunday. Sometimes they wrote back, sometimes they called, and every time I heard their voices, I was reminded that Anna's legacy lived on in the love we shared. One afternoon, as I tended the roses, a neighbor stopped by, her young daughter in tow. The little girl pointed to the flowers, her eyes wide with wonder. "They're so pretty," she said. I smiled, kneeling beside her. "My wife planted these. She believed that if you take care of something, it will bloom, even after you're gone." The girl grinned, and her mother thanked me, and as they walked away, I felt a quiet joy settle in my chest. Life moved forward, as it always does. There were still hard days, moments when the grief returned like a sudden storm, but there was also laughter and friendship, and the steady comfort of knowing I was not alone. I kept Anna's letter in my desk, reading it whenever I needed strength, her words a reminder that love endures, that hope is always possible. On the anniversary of Anna's passing, Ethan and Grace came home. We visited her grave together, bringing fresh roses, sharing stories, and sitting in the quiet, letting our memories fill the space between us. We cried, we laughed, we held each other close, and as we left, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known before. That night, as I sat on the porch watching the stars, I thought about everything we had survived, everything we had learned. I thought about Anna, about the promise I had made to her, about the family we had become. We were not the same as we once were, but we were stronger, kinder, more open to the beauty and pain of life. I closed my eyes, breathed in the scent of roses, and whispered a quiet thank you to Anna, to my children, to the life we had built together. I knew there would be more challenges ahead, more moments of doubt and sorrow, but I also knew that we would face them together, with love, with courage, with the unbreakable bond of family. And as the night deepened and the world grew still, I felt Anna's presence beside me, not as a memory, but as a living part of my heart, guiding me forward, reminding me that even in the face of loss, there is always hope, always love, always the promise of a new day.